While Americans hoarded toilet paper, hand sanitizer, and masks, Russians withdrew $13.6 billion in cash from ATMs. Around 1 trillion rubles was taken out of ATMs and bank branches in Russia over past 7 weeks, amount totaled more than was withdrawn in whole of 2019. This is a stark contrast to how the pandemic affected things in other countries. Personally, I have not handled any cash in over a month. Where I live, everyone is paying electronically to avoid passing virus-laden cash between people. Hoarding cash seems like people are more afraid of their government messing up their economy than of catching the deadly virus. Removed. There is a certain logic to drawing out lots of cash during a crisis, as opposed to toilet paper. Because these days, governments can have ATMs shut down, electronic transfers stopped, and banks kept closed. If that happens, like in Greece 2015, people used to paying with plastic might find themselves effectively broke. So now we are in the part of the 20s where people run on the banks. It's a bit ahead of schedule if we're using the 1920s as a template. My Russian co-worker lived through the fall of the Soviet Union. He thinks we're all naive for thinking our growth-dependent economic system won't collapse, and he puts all his savings in gold. Russian trust in banks. Economy 2020 equals American trust in banks, Economy 1929. I'm from Russia and can tell why I withdrew quite a bit of cash when it all started, equivalent of $500, while normally I use close to zero cash. Spoiler, none of this is related to any bank worries. 1. Little vendor from nearby market delivers fresh grocery to our door. They accept all forms of payment in their store, but not for the delivery. Plus cash is probably 3% cheaper for them than credit card payment, due to the fees. Easy way for me to support them a bit. 2. If something goes wrong with my main bank account, i.e. fraud protection block or even the real fraud, it might be much harder to figure out what's wrong during the quarantine. 3. My wife's grandma lives alone. We are not supposed to travel to her, and she is not supposed to leave the house. Volunteers or social workers can come and help her with every need, for example, buy groceries, but she'll need to give the money to them somehow to make the purchase. In normal situation I just withdrew $50 on my way home just in case, and cash is 5% of my monthly payments. But now I am not supposed to go outside, plus I never know if ATMs nearby stay open and functional. Russian mattresses sure are heavy. The title added in what Americans were doing when they didn't need to. Nice bait. What is the purpose behind including that bit about Americans hoarding? It has absolutely nothing to do with the remainder of the title. Fun fact, the closest grocery store to my Moscow apartment doesn't accept cards. We need that cash if we want to buy that toilet paper. You can use money as toilet paper, but you can't use toilet paper as money. I like how this really has nothing to do with America, but somehow they felt the need to throw in a jab. Russians have been burned by banks and worthless currency too many times. They know to get their money first, ask questions later. Because Russia devolves to a barter economy through the local black market during crisis. Won't make any difference. Low oil prices implies Putin won't be able to pay his bills. What happens next? He prints money, inflation, and Russian rubles become worthless. I came to America from a communist country when the government began to commit genocide against us in the 90s. When a country is historically corrupt, embedded fears ingrained in us after years of witnessing atrocities result in us having a sense of paranoid realism. It's not as simple as Americans hoarding toilet paper. I didn't get this until I came across an article explaining it, but a lot of people are at home rather than in commercial buildings. Manufacturing can't just flip a switch from commercial paper products to residential overnight, as they are tooled up for how the world normally behaves. There's a backlog of commercial TP and not enough residential. It's much more interesting and complicated than a bunch of hoarding, although it is not cool to buy more than you need because it will affect people who need it more. Weird. When this pandemic first started, I withdrew a couple hundred just because I was afraid of just leaving the apartment. I wanted cash tip money for delivery people on hand in case, so they didn't have to report for their taxes. Sucks when you can't trust your government. Everyone should keep some cash at home for weird times like these. It took me a while, but I sold stuff on Craigslist and did odd jobs to make sure I had at least $1,000 at home. Americans would have drawn money out, as well, but that would first require that they had savings to begin with. Super impressed the banks actually had that cash on hand. Pro tip: if civilization collapses, your paper money is just as worthless as credits in a computer. This actually makes the toilet paper hoarders look smart by comparison. Around 1 trillion rubles was taken out of ATMs and bank branches in Russia over past 7 weeks. In other words, Russians also hoarded toilet paper. What I don't understand is that if the economy collapses, or government collapses, etc., isn't the currency useless? Kind of like how the Mandalorian wouldn't accept imperial credits, but he was good for the Bhaskar stuff. We, as a people, are so incredibly stupid, as evidenced by the beachgoers in Florida this weekend and the gape-mouthed protesters in several states. A good old-fashioned bank run. Part of me would love to see cash reserves in American banks tested like this, but the other part of me thinks it would lead to hyperinflation and worthless currency. I tried to read the article to comment more coherently than I probably did, but mobile browsing is fucking impossible. It's like the days of self-multiplying pop UPS back in the 90s. My GF is Russian, here's what she says. It's all because of the crisis in the 90s. People who held their money in banks lost all of their money because the banks collapsed, due to a ton of bad government decisions, like defaulting on debt. Before they collapsed, and partially what caused it, the ruble devalued a ton and people were trying to exchange their money to US dollars before the exchange rates grew worse and worse and they had nothing at all. My parents lost almost all their money during this time period, and so too did a lot of other families. There are also new laws and regulations for banks that say 1. If you have more than 1 million rubles in your bank account, you have to pay 30% tax on that money. A decision of the main court in Russia said that if you can't prove where your money came from in the first place, because of illegal workers both domestic and overseas, the bank can freeze your account and you won't get the money back. Finally, the oil price dropped and everything is closed because of coronavirus, so everyone is panicking and expecting another crisis like in the 90s. Cause only this bald old fart is going to have food and all supplies by the 1st of May and thousands will unnecessarily die because he is unable to make his crime syndicate, which only a madman would call a government, to make at least some supportive action apart from closing everything down, leaving millions with no job, while coronavirus fighting medical personnel has wages lower than a street sweeper in Germany, which is horribly ironic because of how many mentally challenged patriots. Flexing hell yeah, we won WW2 nation of winners and we can do it again while choking on stale bread and counterfeit vodka, trying to figure out how to split the last dime so that their family won't starve to death in their crumbling barracks. Fuck this shit. LOL. Stores around here won't even take cash right now, so. Isn't this what happened in the Great Depression? The banks don't actually have all the money available. This just means the Russians don't have trust or confidence in the banks to back their money. In the US we have confidence our bank money won't just disappear when the wind blows. The corruption and instability over there means that your balance sheet is just a piece of paper when shit hits the fan.